Hello everyone. Please tell me, which city are you listening from? What time is it there? Is everything okay? Or does it feel like someone's watching you? It was the kind of night where everything felt wrong from the moment I woke up. The air was still, too still, with no breeze, no sound, as if the world itself had decided to hold its breath. I had fallen asleep easily enough after another long, exhausting day. My bed felt familiar, comforting, with the soft hum of the fan overhead and the faint rustle of the trees outside my window. But when I opened my eyes, something was different. The room was the same, but the air was thick with an unsettling weight. Something was there, something I couldn't see, but I could feel. At first, I thought it was just the fog of sleep, my mind still caught in the remnants of a dream. But as I lay there, blinking against the darkness, I felt a shift in the atmosphere, a prickling at the back of my neck. I wasn't alone, not in the way I had been before. There was something else in the room with me. I turned my head slowly, trying to make sense of the shadows. The room was dark, save for the dim glow of the streetlight filtering in through the blinds. The walls, the furniture, all seemed unchanged, normal even, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in the night. Something subtle, something I hadn't noticed until now. I stared at the wall beside my bed. It was bare, save for a small stain from when I had knocked over a glass months ago. The walls were old, the paint chipped in places, but there was something about this wall. It felt different. My eyes wandered across it, moving from one shadow to the next, until they landed on something that made my blood run cold. Scratches at first. I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe the paint had chipped away further in the night, or perhaps a stray branch outside had brushed against the window. But no, these were not the kind of marks left by the passing of time or the wind. These scratches were deliberate. They were fresh. They ran jaggedly down the wall beside my bed, like something or someone had clawed their way through the paint, the deep grooves cutting into the surface. I couldn't make sense of it. I sat up, my heart racing now, every instinct screaming at me to move, to get out of the bed, but I couldn't. My eyes stayed fixed on those scratches, on the way they seemed to deepen with every blink, as if they were being made in real time. The air around me felt colder, as though the temperature had dropped several degrees in an instant. Then I heard it. A faint sound, a whisper almost, as though something was brushing against the wall. Something behind it. The air in the room seemed to pulse with each scrape, like a low hum vibrating through the walls, making my skin crawl. I held my breath, straining my ears. The sound was soft but persistent, like something was moving just behind the plaster, something trying to get out. I couldn't look away. My mind screamed at me to move, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed, trapped in the dark, in the stillness, my heart pounding in my chest. It felt like hours had passed in those few seconds. My eyes stayed fixed on the wall, unable to break free, as if I were waiting for the next movement, the next sound. And then, it happened. A thump. It came from the other side of the wall, followed by a scratching sound, deeper this time, as if whatever was behind the wall was trying to get through. The scratches grew louder, frantic, desperate. My stomach turned as I watched the wall tremble slightly, the paint buckling under the pressure of something unseen. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight, like I had forgotten how to make a sound. I swung my legs off the bed, my feet hitting the cold floor, and for the first time, I noticed how cold the room had become. My breath came out in shallow gasps, visible in the air before me. The sound from the wall had stopped, but now a new noise filled the silence. Something worse, a voice. It was barely audible at first, like a low murmur, but it was unmistakable. A voice, soft and ragged, as though it was coming from the very walls themselves. "Let me in." The words were almost a whisper, but they vibrated through my body, settling into my bones. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My mind screamed at me to leave, to run out of the room and never look back, but I couldn't make myself budge. I was rooted to the spot, frozen in place by fear. The scratching resumed, louder this time, more frantic. It was no longer just the light brushing against the wall. No, it was as if something was clawing its way out, tearing at the plaster, trying to break free from whatever lay on the other side. I could feel the vibrations in the floor, in the bed beneath me. The walls groaned, as though they were alive, struggling against the force, trying to get through. I took a step back, my mind swirling with panic, but I couldn't tear myself away. From the sound, from the voice that whispered from behind the wall. "Let me in," it said again, and this time, the voice sounded clearer, closer, like it was speaking directly into my ear. And then, for a split second, everything stopped. The scratches, the whispers, the cold air, all of it. Silence. I stood there, trembling, trying to make sense of what had just happened, trying to tell myself it was just a nightmare, just a product of my tired mind. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't alone in this room. The silence stretched on, suffocating, until it was finally broken by the sound of something heavy scraping against the floor. A shift, a movement. The bed trembled beneath me, and I turned just in time to see the shadows in the corner of the room stretch unnaturally toward me, as if they were reaching. A figure, tall and thin, its form shrouded in darkness, began to step forward from the corner of the room, its feet scraping against the floor in a slow, deliberate movement. Its face was nothing, a blank, empty mask. No features, just a darkness. Where eyes should have been. It stopped at the foot of the bed, towering over me, and I felt a cold breath sweep across my face, making the hairs on my arms stand up. The figure leaned closer, its presence overwhelming, and I heard the faint whisper again, this time clear, sharp. "I've been waiting." My heart slammed against my chest, my mind spinning. I stumbled backward, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me with that empty face, like it was waiting for something, waiting for me to make a move. The air around me thickened, suffocating, until I couldn't breathe. The weight of it pressed against my chest, and I finally broke free, running out of the room, out of the apartment, into the cold night air. But even then, I could still feel it. The presence, the whispers, they followed me deep inside my mind. I never went back to that apartment. Never again, and as the days passed, the scratches on the wall remained with me, etched in my memory. The sound, the voice, the figure, I can still hear them sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, whispering to me in the dark, "Let me in." It started innocently enough. I'd been working late, catching up on deadlines, and when I finally crawled into bed, I expected nothing more than the usual deep, undisturbed sleep I'd come to rely on. I was exhausted, emotionally drained from the weight of the week, and all I wanted was to rest, to let my mind and body shut down for a few hours. So, when I closed my eyes that night, I thought it would be no different from any other night. But then I woke up. It wasn't a loud noise or a jarring sensation that snapped me from my slumber. No, this was a subtle wakefulness, one that seemed to rise from deep within me, as though my body was aware of something I wasn't fully conscious of yet. I opened my eyes, and the room was dark, the kind of dark that settles deep into corners. The kind of darkness that presses against you. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock across the room, the only sound breaking the silence of the night. It was 3 a.m. I didn't think much of it at first. 3 a.m., just the middle of the night, a time when sleep is usually deepest. But as I lay there, the feeling crept in. Something wasn't right. There was a heaviness in the room, a weight in the air, and my heart began to beat faster, even though I couldn't explain why. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was more like a presence, an undeniable sense that I wasn't alone in that room. I glanced around, scanning the familiar surroundings, the dresser by the window, the chair in the corner, the soft glow of the moonlight seeping in through the blinds. Everything was as it should be. Everything was normal. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling. The air felt thick, like someone else was in the room with me, standing just out of sight. But I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, the exhaustion making me paranoid. Then I heard it. A soft shift, almost imperceptible, but there nonetheless. A sound that was too small to be a breeze, too deliberate to be random. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I told myself it was the wind, the house settling, anything but what my mind was suggesting. But the longer I lay there, the more that feeling grew, the feeling of being watched, of being observed from the shadows. My eyes darted toward the corner of the room, where the darkness seemed to gather, pulling in tighter, like it was folding around something or someone. But the room remained still, no movement, no sound, just the clock ticking, the minutes passing, the stillness pressing in. And then, without warning, it happened again. A soft, deliberate shift, closer this time. My eyes snapped open, wide with sudden panic. I could feel it now, more than just a sense. It was as though someone was standing there beside me. I couldn't see them, not with the darkness swallowing everything, but I could feel their presence as if they were right next to me. My body tensed, my muscles frozen, my pulse racing. I didn't move, didn't dare to breathe too loudly, terrified that any sound would shatter the eerie stillness of the moment. My eyes refused to leave that corner, my mind fighting to stay calm, but the feeling was growing stronger. It was like a pull, a force drawing me to that spot, making it impossible to look away. I don't know how long I lay there, trapped in that moment, but when I finally summoned the courage to turn my head, my heart nearly stopped. She was standing next to my bed. I could see her now, just a silhouette, barely visible in the dark, but it was enough. The outline of her body was unmistakable, tall and thin, her hair long and disheveled, falling around her face like a curtain. Her presence filled the room, suffocating the air. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just stood there, her face hidden in the darkness, her body perfectly still. I wanted to scream, to shout, to do something, anything, but I couldn't. My throat was tight, my limbs frozen in place. It was like I was trapped inside my own body, unable to react. I could feel the fear rising in my chest, a tight knot of panic, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from her. I had to know. I had to understand what was happening. I didn't dare speak, but in the silence, I could almost hear her. Not with my ears, but in my head. The soft whispers, almost like a thought that wasn't my own. "You're awake," she said, her voice so faint, so quiet, that it barely reached my ears. The words sent a chill down my spine, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. How did she know I was awake? How long had she been standing there? And then, the worst part, she took a step closer. I wanted to move, to escape, to break free of whatever was holding me in place. But I couldn't. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't even blink. It was like the fear had locked me inside my own body. Her steps were slow, deliberate, as if she had all the time in the world to do whatever it was she was planning. I could see her face now, faintly, just barely visible in the dim light. Her eyes wide and unblinking, staring directly at me, locked onto mine. There was no emotion in them, just an emptiness that felt like a void. She didn't smile, didn't speak, but the silence was louder than anything. And then she did something that made my stomach turn. She reached out, her hand stretching toward me, the fingers cold and thin, as if they were made of something other than flesh. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to pull away, to run, but I was paralyzed, my body refusing to listen to my mind's frantic commands. The moment her hand brushed against mine, the air in the room seemed to go still. Everything froze. The sounds, the movements, the ticking of the clock, it all disappeared. I could feel her presence, like a cold weight pressing against me, pulling me deeper into the suffocating silence. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone. I don't know how long I lay there, my heart hammering in my chest, unable to move, unable to speak. The room was silent again, and the darkness felt like it had swallowed me whole. I couldn't tell if she had ever really been there, if it had all just been a dream, a figment of my imagination. But the coldness, the fear, it lingered. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the pull of the darkness, the weight of her presence beside me. And the worst part was, every time I woke up at 3 a.m., I could feel her there, standing next to the bed, waiting. I don't know what she wants. I don't know what she's trying to do, but I know she's there. And I don't think she'll ever leave. I first noticed it a few weeks ago, after I'd moved into my new apartment. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a place to put the chaos of the past behind me. I was tired of the noise, the clutter, the people always in my space. I wanted peace. So, when I found this little one-bedroom, I jumped at it. It was quiet, tucked away on a side street, just the right amount of isolated. The apartment itself was everything I wanted, spacious, airy, with the kind of light that made the place feel warm, even when the sun wasn't out. Everything was perfect, right down to the bed I had set up in the corner. The first night I spent in it was peaceful. There was a soft hum of the city outside, but that didn't bother me. I slept like I hadn't in months, finally feeling like I could relax. But then, as the days went by, I began to notice something strange. I'm not the kind of person who jumps to conclusions, especially not when it comes to weird sounds or strange occurrences. I tend to brush things off as my mind playing tricks on me. But there was something about this that I couldn't ignore. It started one night when I woke up in the middle of my sleep. The room was dark, as it always was when I woke up in the dead of night. I turned to my side, reaching for the pillow, but as my hand touched it, something made me pause. It was warm, too warm, like it had been recently used. I sat up in bed, confused. I live alone. There was no reason for the pillow to be so warm, to feel like it was still being used. I brushed it off the first time. Maybe I was just too tired. Maybe the heat from the bed had transferred to it. But the next night, the same thing happened. Again, the pillow was warm, like it had been pressed against someone's head. But this time, I also noticed something else, a sound. A soft, almost imperceptible sound, coming from the pillow. It was so faint that I thought maybe I was imagining it, but there it was again. A slight shift, like something was breathing. I sat up in bed, listening. My heart started to race. I looked at the pillow, as if expecting something to happen. But nothing did. The room was silent again, the hum of the city outside, faint but constant. I was starting to wonder if I was losing my mind. There was no way my pillow could be breathing. That was impossible. It had to be a trick of the mind, right? Maybe I had been dreaming, or the sound of my own breath had tricked me into thinking it was coming from the pillow. But the next night, when I lay back down, it happened again. The pillow seemed to shift under my head. A soft breath in, a soft breath out. I couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't just some strange coincidence. It felt wrong, like something that didn't belong was intruding on my peaceful sleep. My instincts screamed at me to move, to get out of bed, but I stayed still, listening as my heart hammered in my chest. The room seemed to press in around me. The soft sounds grew louder. I turned on my bedside lamp, and the sudden light flooded the room, but the pillow remained unchanged. There was nothing unusual about it. No sign of life. It was just a pillow. Yet, I could still hear it. The steady rhythm of breathing, the slight movement beneath the surface of the pillow, like something was lying there with me. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat there in bed, staring at the pillow, waiting for something to happen, for the noise to stop, or for some kind of explanation to appear. But it didn't. It was as if the room had decided to close in on me, to fill the space with a presence I couldn't understand, couldn't explain. The next morning, I checked the pillow. I ran my hands over it, as though expecting to find something. A hole, a hidden speaker. Something, anything that would explain the sensation of warmth, the strange breathing. But there was nothing. It was just a regular pillow. The fabric soft and worn in some places, but nothing that should have caused such an unsettling feeling. But that night, it happened again. This time, when I woke up, I could feel the breath against my cheek. It was warm, close, like someone was lying beside me, just inches away. I turned to face the pillow, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw something shift. A small indentation on the pillow, as though someone had just lifted their head and then laid back down. I didn't stay to investigate. I bolted out of bed, my heart racing, my hands shaking. The apartment felt suffocating, the air thick with something I couldn't explain. I paced around the room, looking for an answer, but there was nothing. No sign of anything unusual. No reason for the fear that had taken root in my chest. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, the pillow untouched on the bed. I tried to sleep, but the thought of returning to that bed, the bed with the breathing pillow, was too much for me. The thought of lying down, feeling that presence so close to me, was unbearable. I didn't go back to the bed that night. I didn't sleep at all, really. But the next morning, I was determined to face it. I needed to know. I needed to be sure there was nothing in that room, nothing in that pillow, that could explain what had been happening. I took the pillow in my hands and held it up, checking every seam, every thread, convinced that I had missed something. But it was just a pillow, nothing more. And yet, as I stared at it, I could almost feel it looking back at me, as if it were aware of me, as if it were waiting for me to lay down again. The fear was too much to bear. I tossed the pillow aside, moving it to the corner of the room, as though that would make it stop, as though removing it from the bed would somehow remove whatever presence had been attached to it. But that night, as I lay in bed, I felt it again. The soft breathing, just beside me, close enough that I could feel it against my skin. The air grew cold, and I pulled the blanket up tighter, my body shaking with fear. I turned to look, and for the first time, I saw it. A figure just beside the bed, barely visible in the dim light. It was tall, too tall to be a person, with a dark, shifting shape that seemed to move with the shadows. It didn't have a face, just a void where features should have been, but I could feel it. I could feel the weight of it, pressing against me, like it was waiting for me to sleep again. And the breathing, it came from the pillow. It was no longer just a sound. It was a presence, a thing that was part of me now, that had always been part of me. The sleep took me too far this time. I've always been the kind of person who needs a little light to sleep. Just a soft glow, something to keep the darkness from feeling so suffocating. It's never been anything grand, just a nightlight in the corner, or a dim lamp left on. By the doorway, I didn't think much of it, never had a reason to. It's just how I sleep, how I've always slept. But lately, I've started to notice things that weren't there before. Small things, subtle, almost too quiet to catch if you weren't paying attention. It started with the light. I was in the middle of an ordinary night, trying to drift off into sleep, when I heard it. A slight shift, barely audible. I could feel it, though, like something in the room had changed. The shadows on the wall seemed to stretch longer, twisting, in the corners where they usually didn't go, but I couldn't place it. I thought it was just my tired mind playing tricks on me. So, I closed my eyes and tried to ignore it, pulled the blanket up over my shoulders, and drifted back into a restless sleep. The next morning, I woke to the usual quiet, but something felt off. I glanced around the room, my eyes naturally drawn to the corner where the nightlight sat, faintly glowing. The light was still on, but it wasn't just the light that caught my attention. The shadows were different. They seemed to reach farther than usual. The corner where the light met the walls had shifted, not in a way that made sense, like the darkness was pooling around the edges, thickening, stretching, bending toward the light. I told myself I was just tired, maybe imagining things, I left it alone. The light was still on, after all, and nothing had happened, right? But that night, as I lay in bed again, trying to sleep, I heard it again. That shift, that subtle movement in the room, the air growing heavier, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. And then it happened. The light flickered. It wasn't just a simple flicker, like a bulb trying to turn on. It was something more deliberate, something more controlled. The light dimmed for a second, then brightened again. But when it did, the shadows in the room had moved. No, they hadn't moved. They were following the glow. The light was casting something, or something was casting itself, into the shape of long, stretching fingers, wrapping themselves toward the source of the glow, toward the nightlight. I froze. There was a growing sense of unease, a feeling that wasn't quite fear yet, but was unmistakably close. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. I tried to reason that it was just the old bulb acting up, maybe something with the wiring, but every instinct in me told me it was something else, something wrong. I watched the light, my gaze fixed on it, waiting for the shadows to shift again, but they didn't. Everything remained still. My heart was racing, and I forced myself to turn away, to close my eyes. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself that I had been imagining things. But I couldn't. I left the light on that night, and the next, and the next. But each night, I felt the presence grow. The shadows would twist, slowly, deliberately, inching closer to the light, as though they were drawn to it, as though they were feeding off of it. Every time the light flickered, the shadows stretched farther, grew longer, as if the glow was nourishing them, giving them form. And then it changed. The nightlight wasn't just a light anymore. It had become a beacon. Something that the shadows couldn't resist. I started seeing things in the corners of the room that shouldn't have been there. Figures in the dark, just beyond the light's reach, moving as if they were waiting for me to acknowledge them. Figures that never fully emerged, just standing at the edge of the glow, their features hidden, their presence undeniable. I kept the light on, but it didn't seem to help anymore. No matter how much light I left on, the shadows would stretch toward it. And in the silence of my room, the shadows would whisper the softest of sounds, just on the edge of hearing, but always there. Come closer. I don't know when I started to dread it, when the feeling of being watched became overwhelming. The shadows no longer stayed in the corners, no longer hid in the edges of my vision. They were crawling, slithering toward the light, as if they were feeding off it, pulling it in, drawing it to them. I couldn't stop it, no matter how much. I tried to move, to break free from the oppressive stillness of my room. I couldn't escape the pull of the light. It was always there, always beckoning me. I couldn't sleep. I started to leave all the lights on, all the lamps, the nightlight, even the bathroom light. The light would flicker, and the shadows would stretch, always creeping, always following the glow. But the more light I added, the more shadows appeared. It was as if the light was inviting them in, inviting them to feed. And every time I thought I'd found relief, every time I'd closed my eyes and tried to sleep, I'd wake to find the light still on. But this time, it wasn't the same. The shadows had moved. They were closer now, closer to me, almost touching me. I could feel them. I could feel them creeping across the floor, brushing against the edges of my bed, curling up the walls, their fingers slipping into the light. The air grew heavier, suffocating, like the room had become a trap. It was as though the light was no longer just a way for me to see, but a lifeline. A beacon keeping me tethered to something real. Without it, I knew the shadows would swallow me whole. And now, I can't leave a single light off. Not for a second. Not even when I think I'm alone. Because as soon as the glow dims, I hear the shift, the movement, the whispers. They're waiting for you. And now I know the truth. The light is not for me. It's for them. They follow the glow, chasing it, feeding on it, and I'm trapped in the light, in the dark, with no way to escape. Because every time I leave a light on, it follows the glow, and when I turn it off, the shadows get closer. It wasn't the first time I'd felt a strange presence in my bedroom. In fact, I'd gotten used to the odd noises, the creaks of the floorboards, the occasional draft that seemed to come from nowhere. But this was different. This felt real. This felt close. It started on a Tuesday night, after I had moved into the apartment a few months ago. The apartment was old, with wooden floors that groaned with every step and narrow, creaky stairs that felt like they might collapse beneath me at any moment. But it had its charm. The vintage wallpaper in the living room, the high ceilings, the way the light filtered through the curtains at sunset. Despite the oddities, I'd grown attached to it, even if the place did feel a little off at times. I had just gotten into bed, the soft weight of the blankets settling around me like a comforting embrace. The rain had been falling steadily, for hours, the rhythm of it soothing. I had grown accustomed to the sound of it tapping against the window as I drifted off to sleep. But that night, as I began to settle into a deep sleep, something unusual stirred. I woke up, my body still heavy with sleep, but something in the air felt wrong. The room was darker than it should have been, despite the moonlight coming in through the window. My eyes adjusted slowly to the shadows around me, and as I lay there, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The headboard of the bed, where the wall and the wooden frame met, had always been solid. It had a few scuff marks from years of use, but it had never seemed odd. Tonight, however, the space between the headboard and the wall seemed wider. I could have sworn I felt something shifting on the other side of it. I held my breath, my mind racing with confusion and fear. It wasn't a draft. It wasn't the house settling. No, this was something different. Something closer. Something I couldn't explain. And then, as if on cue, I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper, right at the edge of my ear. It was so faint I thought I had imagined it. But then it came again. A voice, so quiet, so soft, as though it was speaking through the walls. "Can you hear me?" The words barely made it through the silence, and I froze. I could feel my heart beat against my chest, the blood rushing in my ears. I blinked, not sure if I was still asleep, not sure if it was just a trick of the mind. But no, I was wide awake. I was certain of that. The voice came again, this time a little clearer. But it was still so soft, like it was coming from somewhere just beyond reach, just on the other side of the headboard. "Come closer," it whispered. I wanted to scream, to jump out of bed, to flee from the room, but I couldn't move. My limbs felt like they were made of stone, heavy and unresponsive. My breath came in shallow gasps as I tried to convince myself that I was dreaming, that this wasn't real, but deep down, I knew it was. The sensation, The voice, the weight of it pressing against me. It was all too real. I glanced at the headboard, my eyes wide with fear, my heart hammering in my chest. The wood, once solid and unremarkable, now seemed to loom over me like a barrier. A thin veil separating me from whatever was on the other side. But the whispers? They kept coming, like a gentle breeze, too soft to be anything but unsettling. Please, come closer. I tried to sit up, to escape. But I couldn't. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the space between the headboard and the wall, where the shadows seemed to twist and move, as if something was waiting there, something I couldn't see, something that knew I was awake, knew I was listening. I wanted to reach out, to touch the wall, to see if there was some explanation for this, some reason behind the unease that filled the room. But my hand stayed frozen at my side, my fingers trembling in the darkness. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. All I could do was listen. And as I did, the voice came again. Only this time, it was different. It was closer. I've been waiting for you. A cold shiver ran down my spine, and I felt the room close in around me. My head was spinning. I could hear my breath now, quick and shallow, the sound almost too loud in the oppressive silence. My eyes flicked to the door, to the window, to anywhere that could offer an escape. But the whispers wouldn't stop. They grew louder, more insistent. I'm here, the voice said, its tone soft and soothing, but there was something wrong about it. Come closer. I'm waiting. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a command. It was inviting me. The fear inside me was overwhelming, but something else was pulling at me, like a rope, tugging me closer to the headboard, to the whispers on the other side. I felt my body move on its own, despite my mind screaming at me to stop, to get out of bed and run far, far away from whatever was on the other side of that wall. But I couldn't. I couldn't stop myself. My hand slowly reached out, trembling. As it neared the headboard, my fingers brushing against the wood. The room felt colder. The air pressed down on me, thick and suffocating. I was close, so close. And then, just as I was about to touch the wall, I heard the voice one final time, clear as day, right in my ear. You shouldn't have come. I jerked my hand back, my whole body trembling, the cold sweat on my skin sticking to the sheets. I pulled the blankets tight around me, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The room was silent again, the only sound the slow, rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. But the silence didn't comfort me. It wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. It was wrong. I lay there, staring at the headboard, at the shadows, in the corners of the room. I don't know how long I stayed awake, my mind racing, my heart thundering in my chest. The darkness had returned, but now it was alive. It was waiting for me. The whispers had stopped, but I knew that wouldn't. Last, I knew that whatever was on the other side of that headboard would come back, and next time, I wouldn't be able to stop it. I didn't notice it at first. When I climbed into bed, the weight of the day pressing down on me, I was grateful for the warmth of the blankets. I let my body sink into the softness of the mattress, the exhaustion from a long week making me feel like I was floating in a sea of comfort. I pulled the blanket up around my shoulders, settling in for the night. The familiar weight of it, a small comfort in an otherwise chaotic world. The house was silent. Too silent. The only sound was the occasional creak of the floorboards as the house settled, the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the distant rumble of traffic outside. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like it's waiting for something. I tried to push the feeling away. I had been living in the house for months now, and I knew it well. There was nothing unusual, nothing out of place. I closed my eyes, listening to the soft rustle of the blanket as I shifted beneath it, trying to get comfortable. But the night felt different. I couldn't place why. Something was off. Something in the air, a subtle shift that made my skin crawl. But I told myself it was just my imagination. I had been working late, after all. My mind was tired. I must have dozed off. Because the next thing I knew, I woke up in the dark, the quiet of the room surrounding me. I could feel the weight of the blankets against my skin, the familiar softness. But then I realized something. The blanket was too tight. I shifted, trying to pull it off my chest, but it didn't budge. My heart rate spiked, and I tried to move my arms to break free, but the blanket felt like it was wrapped around me, as though it had grown heavier, tighter. I tugged at the fabric, but it didn't loosen. It was as if the blanket had a life of its own, holding me in place, pressing against me. I froze, my breath coming in shallow gasps. It wasn't just the weight of it, it was the sensation. The fabric moved, not like the usual shift of cloth when you adjust in bed, but something far more deliberate, something alive. The blanket seemed to tighten, pulling closer around me, as if it was trying to wrap me up entirely. My pulse quickened, and I tried to sit up, but my body was restrained. I could feel it, the blanket pressing down on my chest, squeezing in, a way that made it hard to breathe. The room was still, eerily quiet, but the feeling of something wrong was overwhelming. My eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything, to explain this sensation, but all I saw was darkness. The clock on the bedside table read 2:37 a.m. The stillness of the night only amplified the strangeness of the moment. The pressure on my chest increased, the fabric of the blanket pulling tighter and tighter. I could feel it now, pulling at my limbs, as though it was actively trying to hold me down. I struggled against it, my arms shaking as I tried to pry the blanket off, but it didn't loosen. It only got tighter. And then, as I lay there, helpless, I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible sound. A faint rustling, as if something was moving beneath the blanket. I held my breath, straining my ears, but the sound was gone as quickly as it had come. But the pressure, the sensation, remained. Something was there, underneath, something that didn't belong. I wanted to scream, to call out, but the air in the room felt thick, like the very atmosphere was pressing against me. I couldn't find my voice. I couldn't move. The blanket had become a weight I couldn't escape. The silence stretched on, suffocating me, and then a soft, cold breath. It moved across my face, like a whisper, brushing against my skin. My eyes snapped open, and for a moment, I was paralyzed with terror. The blanket was no longer just pressing against me. It was moving. It shifted, undulating like something was beneath it. Something alive, something aware. My heart raced, and I could feel the blood thundering in my ears. I tried to shove the blanket off, but it refused to budge. The fabric seemed to cling to my body, as if it had grown heavier, stronger. And then, a voice. Soft, almost inaudible, but unmistakable. It came from beneath the blanket, from somewhere near my chest, and it whispered my name. Come closer. The words were chilling, laced with something I couldn't identify. A pull, a beckoning that made my stomach churn. The voice was deep, but not entirely human. It felt distant, like it was coming from a place I couldn't reach, a place far beyond the room. I felt the blanket shift again, moving against my skin, tightening as if it were trying to wrap itself around me. It was cold now, an unnatural cold that sank deep into my bones. It wasn't the chill of the night air or the typical coolness of the fabric. It was something different. Something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The pressure on my chest was suffocating, and the whispering continued, coming from beneath the blanket, but I couldn't make out the words. It was as if whatever was beneath the fabric was trying to pull me in, trying to consume me. I fought against it, my body trembling, but my limbs felt like they were weighted down, like they were no longer mine to control. I could feel my heartbeat, thudding in my chest, louder than ever, and the blanket tightened again, pulling harder, dragging me deeper into its suffocating embrace. Finally, with one last desperate surge of energy, I shoved with all my strength. The blanket, for a moment, loosened, just enough for me to breathe again. I gasped for air, my lungs filling with the sweet, cold air of the room. The pressure on my chest finally eased, and I pulled the blanket away from me, throwing it to the floor in a frantic motion. The room was still again. The air felt lighter, and the sensation of something wrong had vanished, as if it had never been there at all. But my mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The breath, the pressure, the whispers beneath the blanket. I looked down at the blanket, now crumpled on the floor, the fabric ordinary once more. Nothing was there. Nothing was moving. The room was silent, save for my rapid breathing. But I knew it had been real. I knew what I had felt, what I had heard, had been something more than a nightmare, something more than a trick of the mind. As I lay there, wide awake now, my heart still pounding in my chest, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Whatever had happened, whatever had tried to pull me under, it wasn't gone. It was just waiting, waiting for the next time I closed my eyes. And when I finally did sleep again, I left the blanket on the floor. I didn't want to stay in that house. The moment I stepped inside, something about it felt wrong. The air was too still, the walls too quiet, as if they were holding secrets. The house was old, worn around the edges, and I should have known better than to accept the offer to rent it. But I was desperate. I needed a place, and the rent was cheap. So I moved in, thinking I could handle it. I told myself it was just the natural wear of an old house, that it was nothing more than creaky floors and the occasional draft. The first few nights were fine, just the usual sounds of settling, the house groaning under its own weight. I could live with that. But by the fourth night, things started to change. Subtle things at first, things I brushed off as my imagination. The feeling that the walls were closer, like the house itself was inching in on me. The air, once dry and lifeless, became thick, as though something was pressing against the very fabric of the room. I had always been someone who believed in the logical, in the explainable. I told myself there was nothing to fear, that old houses just have a way of making people feel uneasy. I was fine, until that night. I remember waking up in the dead of night, my body suddenly alert, my skin prickling with unease. The room was dark, the moonlight creeping through the blinds, casting long thin shadows on the floor. Everything was still. Too still. I tried to settle back down, but there was a weight on my chest, a heaviness that made it impossible to close my eyes again. And then I heard it. A soft rustling sound from beneath the bed. I froze, my eyes wide open, staring at the edge of the mattress, where the shadows pooled like a waiting presence. At first, I thought it was nothing, maybe the wind, or the house, settling, but no. This wasn't the usual creaks I had grown used to. This was something different, something moving, something aware of me. I couldn't bring myself to look, couldn't force my body to shift even an inch. The rustling continued, a soft scraping sound, as though something was trying to crawl out from beneath the bed. I held my breath, telling myself it was just an animal. It had to be. Maybe a rat or some other creature had gotten inside the house. But then, the scraping stopped. A silence descended, thick and suffocating. My heart was pounding in my chest, my ears straining for any sound, any movement. And then, in the quiet, I heard it. A slow, deliberate breath. It came from beneath the bed. Not the kind of breath you'd hear from a person who was asleep. It was too deep, too wrong, like something inhuman. My blood turned to ice as I realized whatever was under there wasn't supposed to be there. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even breathe. My mind was telling me to run, but my body refused to cooperate. I stared at the shadow beneath the bed, watching as it seemed to grow, the darkness swirling thicker as if the room itself was feeding it, and then it happened. A hand. A pale, bony hand. Its fingers long and gnarled, slowly slid out from under the bed. The hand was impossibly thin, like it belonged to something not quite human. It trembled slightly, the fingers curling and uncurling in the air, as if reaching for something, for me. I couldn't look away. I should have screamed. I should have run, but my body refused to obey. I was paralyzed by the sight of it, unable to move, unable to tear my eyes away from that hand. It slowly inched closer to the edge of the bed, its fingers brushing against the floor, scraping lightly as though testing the distance. The room seemed to grow colder, the air thickening with something dark, something ancient. I could feel it. The presence. It was getting closer. I closed my eyes, finally forcing myself to move, to do something, but when I opened them again, the hand was gone. The room was silent. Still, I almost convinced myself I had imagined it, that I had dreamed it up in my half-awake stupor. I held my breath, the silence ringing in my ears, but then I saw it. A finger, just one long, pale finger, pressed lightly against the corner of the mattress, reaching toward me. It wasn't a dream. It was real. The fingers curled. The hand began to pull itself further out, its grip tightening as if it was dragging itself closer to me. The air around me grew colder, heavier, and the room seemed to close in, the walls pressing against me like the house itself was alive, moving, trying to suffocate me. That's when I ran. I bolted out of bed, grabbing whatever I could and throwing myself out of the room, slamming the door behind me. My legs were shaky, my heart still racing, and I barely made it to the front door before I heard the sound again. The scratching, the scraping, the movement. But this time, it wasn't just beneath the bed, it was all around me. From every corner of the room, from every shadow, I could hear it. The movement, the breath, and the whisper, so faint but unmistakable, "Come back." I never returned to that bedroom. I never stayed another night in that house. The landlord never found out why I left so suddenly, but I couldn't tell him the truth. No one would have believed me. I don't even know if I believe it. But I do know this. Every time I close my eyes, I can still hear it. The scraping, the breath, the hand that reached for me from under the bed. And I can still feel the cold, pale fingers brushing against my skin. Waiting, always waiting. It started innocently enough. A simple habit. Something I hadn't even thought twice about when I first noticed it. It was the way she shifted in bed, the way she'd wake up and rearrange the blankets, then roll over to the other side. At first, I thought it was just her trying to find a more comfortable position, a natural shift that happens during the night. But after a while, I began to notice something strange. It wasn't that she just shifted. It was that every night, without fail, she would wake up and switch sides of the bed, every single night. I'd never seen her do it when we first started sharing a bed. She was always a deep sleeper, and I assumed we both just woke up in the same positions every morning. But then, one night, I woke up to find her on the other side of the bed, a side she never slept on. At first, I thought it was just an accident, a random movement during sleep. But when it happened again the next night, I started to wonder if there was something more to it. I didn't mention it to her at first. I didn't want to seem paranoid or make it into something that it wasn't. But every time I woke up in the middle of the night, I noticed she was always lying on the opposite side of the bed, her back turned to me, facing the wall. It was as if she were consciously avoiding the side where she had slept the night before. After about a week of this, I started keeping track. I noticed a pattern. It wasn't just a random habit. She was always switching sides, never staying on the same one twice. And she always did it in the dead of night, when I was still asleep. One night, after she had shifted again, I lay there, wide awake, watching her. Her breathing was slow and steady, but there was something unsettling about the way she moved. It wasn't like the usual restless shifting that comes with a bad dream, or a need to adjust. It was deliberate, precise. I tried to shake off the feeling that was creeping into my chest. I told myself I was being silly, but the unease grew gnawing at me the more I thought about it. I decided that night, once she had shifted again, I would stay awake, just to see what happened. She did it again. At around 3 a.m., I heard her move, the rustle of the sheets, the shift of her body as she carefully slid to the other side of the bed. I didn't move. I didn't want to wake her, but I watched, my eyes fixed on her, the room too silent, too still. She rolled over, but instead of settling into the bed like she usually did, she stopped. She was facing the wall, her back to me, her eyes closed, but she didn't fall asleep. She lay there perfectly still, not breathing, not moving, as though she were waiting for something. waiting for something to happen. The silence was suffocating, and as the minutes passed, I felt my body tense, my heart hammering in my chest. And then, the softest whisper broke the stillness. "Come closer," she whispered. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. It was barely audible, but it was unmistakable. It was her voice, the one I knew so well, but it wasn't right. It was wrong, too quiet, too empty. I wanted to speak, to call out to her, but my voice stuck in my throat. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I had just heard. Maybe it was a dream, maybe it was a sleep-talking episode, but the more I thought about it, the more the words haunted me. Come closer. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things. I tried to roll over, to go back to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something was out of place. I had never heard her whisper in her sleep like that before. She had never said anything that made me feel uneasy. Then, just as quickly as the whisper had come, it stopped. She breathed again, slow and steady, as though nothing had happened, and her body relaxed into the bed, but I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake the rest of the night, watching her, waiting for something else to happen, for some explanation to reveal itself, but nothing did. The next morning, when she woke up, I tried to act normal. I didn't mention the whispers, didn't bring up the way she shifted in the night. I just kissed her goodbye like any other morning, but inside I was shaken. The following nights became harder to ignore. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel her shifting, the deliberate motion of her body as she moved from one side of the bed to the other. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't understand why she was doing it, but I could feel it deep in my gut that it wasn't just a habit, it was something more, something hidden. And then, one night, it happened again. She shifted like always, but this time, I kept my eyes open, determined to see what would happen. She turned away from me, her back facing the wall as usual, but this time, something was different. This time, her body felt rigid, like she wasn't just asleep, she was waiting. I could feel it in the way she lay there, perfectly still, as if she was waiting for something to happen, something that didn't belong in the world I knew. The whisper came again, "Come closer." I jerked upright in bed, my heart pounding, my body tense with fear. She didn't move. She didn't seem to be aware of me, of anything. She was still, breathing softly, her back to me, her body unnaturally stiff. It was as if the person I thought I knew was no longer in that bed with me. The whisper came again, louder now, a low murmur that seemed to vibrate through the air. "Come closer, it's time." I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to make sense of it. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that the bed we shared wasn't just a bed anymore. It was a place where something was waiting, something that wasn't human, something that was tied to her, to me, to the side she never slept on twice. I stayed awake, watching her, feeling the weight of her body shift next to mine. But this time, I wasn't just watching her, I was waiting. Waiting for the moment when I couldn't ignore it anymore. And when I finally closed my eyes again, I could feel it. Something had followed the glow of the nightlight. Something was standing beside my bed, waiting for me to reach out. It was a long, exhausting week, and I was grateful when I finally collapsed into bed on Friday night. The apartment felt colder than usual, but I didn't mind. The blankets were heavy, the room was quiet, and the only sounds were the distant hum of the city and the occasional creak of the old floorboards beneath me. It was a comfort, a reprieve from everything that had been weighing on me. The first few minutes were peaceful, just the gentle shifting of the bed as I adjusted my pillow. My eyes drifted shut, my body sinking deeper into the mattress. It didn't take long before I was fully asleep, and for the first time in days, I could finally let go. But when I woke up, everything felt off. I opened my eyes slowly, the dim light from the window creeping in. The first thing I noticed was the dampness. The mattress beneath me was soaked. The fabric of the sheets clung to my skin, cool and wet. The sensation was immediate, jarring, and my first instinct was to sit up, to move out of the wetness, but as I did, something strange happened. I wasn't wet at all. I felt completely dry. I froze for a moment, sitting up slowly and looking around the room, as if the answer would somehow present itself. The sheets beneath me were soaked through, the mattress visibly damp, yet my skin was dry to the touch. My clothes were dry, my hair was dry. Everything about me was completely, utterly dry. I reached over, my fingers brushing the fabric of the mattress, and the dampness was unmistakable. The smell of moisture filled the air, a musty, heavy scent that made me shudder. It wasn't just the sheets or the blankets, the mattress itself had absorbed the moisture like it had been drenched in water. But I still couldn't figure it out. How could I be dry? How could I be completely unaffected by the water around me? I stood up, my feet meeting the cold, damp floor, and as I looked at the bed, something else caught my eye. A trail of moisture was creeping from the edge of the mattress, pooling on the floor beside the bed. It was as though something had been spilling out from beneath the mattress, though there was nothing on the surface to explain it. The water seemed to seep out of nowhere, as if it had just materialized from thin air. I felt a strange unease settle in the pit of my stomach. I looked around the room, trying to make sense of it, but there was no explanation. The apartment was the same as it had always been, the same as it had been when I'd gone to sleep. Nothing had changed, but the mattress was wrong. I could feel it, the weight of the dampness beneath me, pressing against my skin. My heart began to race as I stepped away from the bed, my eyes darting from the soaked sheets to the puddle on the floor, but there was still no answer. No sign of where the water had come from, or why I was untouched by it. And that's when I heard it. A soft sound, almost imperceptible, but there. It came from beneath the mattress. A faint, wet slap, followed by a slow, rhythmic sound. Like something shifting beneath the bed. Something wet and heavy, moving around. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. My mind raced, my body frozen in place, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. It sounded like something was alive under the bed. The soft sound of it, like something was dragging itself, squirming in the dampness. I couldn't move. My feet felt glued to the floor, my legs too shaky to carry me. I just stood there, staring at the bed, trying to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But the noise was real. I could hear it, feel it vibrating through the floor. I took another step back, but that's when I saw it. A hand. It was small, pale, and soaked in water. The fingers curled slightly, as if reaching toward me. It was pressed against the bottom of the mattress, just barely visible, the wetness pooling around it like something was trying to push up from beneath. I felt my throat close up, a scream caught in my chest. But I couldn't make a sound. I couldn't move. The hand was there, beneath the mattress, pressing upward like it was trying to break free from whatever dark space had kept it hidden. And then it shifted. The hand jerked back, disappearing beneath the mattress once again, but the noise didn't stop. It only grew louder. The wet, dragging sound, the scraping of something soft, something wet started to move across the underside of the bed, like something was crawling toward me from beneath. The mattress bulged ever so slightly, as if something was pushing against it from underneath. I snapped out of my paralysis. My body surged into motion before I even knew what I was doing, stumbling backward, away from the bed, away from the noise. I backed toward the door, my mind screaming at me to run, to get out of the room, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the bed. The mattress. It was alive, somehow. It was moving on its own, shifting with the sounds of something hidden beneath it. I felt the door frame against my back, my hand reaching for the doorknob, but I couldn't leave. I couldn't walk away. Not without knowing, without seeing what was underneath. With shaking hands, I grabbed the edge of the mattress and pulled. It came up easily, like something was pushing against it from below. But when I lifted it, the room seemed to darken, the air pressing in around me as if the walls themselves were closing in. And then I saw it. The underside of the mattress wasn't empty. There, soaked into the fabric, was a face. It was a face I recognized, but it wasn't mine. It was the face of someone I had once known. Someone who had disappeared. Years ago, a face I thought I'd never see again. But it wasn't just the face. No, the thing that shook me to my core was the expression. The eyes were wide open, unblinking, the lips stretched in a silent scream. And the worst part was that the face was alive. It was moving, shifting beneath the mattress, its mouth working, gasping for breath, trying to reach me. From the inside, I dropped the mattress with a scream, my body shaking uncontrollably. I stumbled backward, my legs buckling beneath me, and I didn't stop running until I was outside, in the cold night air, the dark of the street filling my vision. But even as I stood there, gasping for air, I could still hear it, the faint, wet dragging sound, like something was following me, moving through the apartment, pushing toward me. And then I realized, as I stood there in the dark, shivering, it wasn't over. It would never be over. The mattress wasn't the only thing that was alive. Something had followed me. Something was still waiting. I've always been the kind of person who needs music to fall asleep. It started when I was a kid. I used to fall asleep to the sound of lullabies, soft and soothing, until they blurred into a melody that drifted me off into the quiet of the night. Over the years, it became a ritual. The familiar hum of the music, the gentle rise and fall of the notes, helped drown out the rest of the world and filled the emptiness of the quiet. I wasn't one for silence. The stillness of the night always felt too heavy, like something was lurking just beyond the edge of my awareness. Music, something soft and rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat, was the perfect antidote. It calmed me, comforted me, and allowed me to sink into sleep without the weight of the unknown pressing against my thoughts. So every night, without fail, I would play something low in the background, an instrumental track, classical piano, or ambient sounds. Nothing too intense, just enough to blend into the quiet of the room. But recently, things have started to change. It started with the music. At first, I thought it was my imagination, a note here or there, stretching longer than it should. A pause in the melody that felt wrong, out of place. I would wake up in the middle of the night, my mind groggy, and hear the music still playing, even though I was certain I had turned it off before going to sleep. But I brushed it off. I told myself I was just too tired, that I had forgotten to turn it off, or that it was a setting on my app, an accidental loop, something that made sense in my half-asleep state. But then it happened again, and this time the music was different. I woke up one night, my eyes still heavy with sleep, and the room was filled with the soft sound of music, just like before. But it wasn't the familiar instrumental I always played. It was something else, a sound I didn't recognize. At first, it was subtle, like an undertone beneath the melody, but then it grew louder, a distorted hum, a kind of breathing sound that blended with the music, rhythmic but unsettling. I sat up, confused, my heart racing. My phone was on the nightstand, but when I reached for it, I realized the music wasn't coming from there. It was coming from the speakers, the ones I'd never set up to play anything during the night. But they were on, vibrating with the unfamiliar sound. I got up, my body stiffed with tension, and looked around the room. The walls were just as they always had been, the door closed, the window locked. There was nothing out of place. Yet, the music, that breathing sound, kept going, a low, throbbing hum that seemed to echo from somewhere deeper. I reached for the speakers, turning them off, but the hum continued, like it was emanating from the very air itself. That's when I heard it, a whisper. It was faint, just a breath, almost inaudible, but it was there. It was like the music had become something else, something alive. The voice didn't speak words, just a soft, rhythmic sound, but somehow I understood. It was calling my name. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure if I was still asleep, if I had drifted into some kind of half-dream, but the room felt different now. The air felt heavier, as if the walls were closing in, the floor too solid beneath my feet. I looked at the speakers again, but they were silent now. The music had stopped. The whispering stopped. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat. I stood there, in the stillness, my body frozen in place, and I realized something. The music hadn't stopped. It had shifted. It had changed. The whisper, the hum, it was no longer just background noise. It had become part of the room itself, part of the silence that had once felt so comfortable. But now, it was alive. It was watching, listening. The next night, I turned the speakers off again, determined not to let whatever had happened before creep back in. I couldn't be sure what it was. Maybe a trick of the mind, a glitch in the system. But I couldn't ignore the feeling. The way the music seemed to breathe with me, seemed to stretch and change. That night, the silence felt different, heavier, and the music returned. It wasn't in the speakers this time. It was in the walls. It was in the air, vibrating beneath my skin. A soft, distant hum that I couldn't escape. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how many times I turned the speakers off, the music wouldn't stop. The air hummed with it, a soft, almost imperceptible sound that seemed to breathe with me, follow me. It was like the room itself had become an instrument, and I was its sole audience. I wasn't listening to the music. The music was listening to me. That's when I realized the truth. I wasn't alone, not in this room, not in this space. Whatever was creating the music, whatever was breathing through the walls, it was listening to me. It knew when I slept. It knew when I woke. It knew when I was awake, when I was afraid. It wasn't the music I couldn't sleep without anymore. It was the silence I was terrified of. Because in the silence, it listens, it waits, it learns. And when I close my eyes to sleep, I can hear it waiting for me. The music, the breathing, the whispering, and no matter how many times I turn the speakers off, no matter how many times I shut everything down, it never stops. It only waits for me to listen. And when I do, I can hear the music, and it hears me. It's the kind of thing you try to ignore. The kind of thing that happens in the dead of night when the world is too still, too silent, to make sense of what your mind is trying to convince you is real. I've always been the type to convince myself there's a logical explanation, that everything has a reason, even the oddities, even the moments when something feels wrong. But this I couldn't explain. I had moved into the apartment a month ago, eager for a fresh start. It was small, tucked away on the third floor of an old building, the kind of place you would never notice unless you were looking for it. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. The walls were thin, but it had a warmth that I liked. The creaky floors, the worn-down window frames, they gave it character, like the apartment had lived 100 lives before me. At first, everything was fine. Quiet, just the hum of the city outside and the occasional creak of the building settling. I liked it. It was peaceful. But over time, I started to notice something. It was small at first, easy to overlook. A tap on the wall. A faint rustling in the middle of the night. I thought I was imagining things. The building was old. The pipes creaked. The wind rattled the windows sometimes. I told myself it was nothing. Then came the crying. At first, I thought it was just the sounds of the building. Maybe someone next door, or the tenants below me. But the crying wasn't distant. It wasn't muffled by walls or floors. It was right beside me, right next to my ear. The first time it happened, I was just falling asleep. The room was dark, the kind of dark that makes everything seem softer, quieter. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the apartment. I was on the edge of sleep, drifting, when I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible sob. The kind of sound that doesn't demand attention at first. But then it came again, quieter, but they're unmistakable. It was close, too close. My eyes snapped open, my heart racing, my body froze. The sob wasn't from another room. It wasn't from a neighboring apartment. It was right next to me, right beside my ear. I could almost feel it vibrating in my bones, the softness of the cry creeping through the darkness. I turned my head quickly, but there was nothing. Just the shadows of the room. The silence returned. I held my breath, waiting for something, anything to move, but nothing came. Sobs had stopped. The room was still, almost too still. I convinced myself I had imagined it. Maybe it was just a dream, I thought, shaking my head, trying to dismiss the unsettling feeling that lingered in my chest. The next night, it happened again. This time, I was more aware, more alert, but the moment I started to fall asleep, I heard it. The quiet, fragile sobbing, right next to my ear. I sat up quickly, my heart in my throat, my eyes darting around the room, but there was nothing there. Just the faint moonlight filtering through the blinds, casting long shadows across the floor. No one was in the room with me. No one was crying. And yet, I could still hear it. Soft, quiet. The sound of someone, or something, crying. I tried to ignore it. I really did. I told myself it was just the building settling. It was just my mind, drifting in the quiet, making things up. But that night, I couldn't sleep. The sound, the crying, wouldn't stop. It was almost like it was waiting for me to listen, waiting for me to hear it. And when I did, the sound would become even more real, more undeniable. It was like something was reaching out from the darkness, something just beyond my sight. I could feel it, that pressure, like someone was standing right next to me, just outside my line of vision. I wanted to turn the lights on, to check every corner of the room, to convince myself that it was just a sound. But I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I was paralyzed, trapped in the suffocating silence, hearing that soft crying right beside me. The next morning, I was exhausted. I barely slept. The sound of it haunted me throughout the day, clinging to my thoughts like something I couldn't shake off. But when I got home that evening, the apartment was silent. Quiet. Too quiet. I didn't hear the crying that night, or the next, or the one after that. The absence of it was almost worse than the sound itself. The silence felt heavy, as though it were waiting for something to happen. I thought maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was just overtired. Maybe my mind had played tricks on me. But then, one night, it happened again. I was half asleep, drifting, when the sobbing came, soft but clear. Right beside me. Closer, I could feel it. I could feel the air shift, the coldness that seemed to settle in the room. The crying was no longer a distant sound. It was real. It was coming from beside me. I turned my head quickly, but this time, when I looked, I didn't see the empty space. I saw her. She was there, standing at the edge of my bed, her face pale, her eyes hollow, dark shadows under her gaze. She was crying, but no sound came from her lips. The tears streamed down her face, her mouth moving as if to speak, but nothing came out. I could feel the coldness of her presence, like a chill spreading through the room. Her form was fading, shifting like smoke in the air, but the sobs were still there, growing louder, pressing in on me, filling the room with that unbearable sadness. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. My body refused to obey, and all I could do was stare at her, at the figure beside my bed. The tears that streamed down her face seemed endless, as though she had been crying for a long time. Her eyes locked with mine, but there was no recognition in them. Only emptiness, only sorrow. And then, just as suddenly as she appeared, she was gone. The room was still again. The silence was deafening, but this time, it wasn't comforting. It wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I packed a bag and left the apartment, telling myself I'd return once I had a moment to collect myself, to calm down. But I never went back. I couldn't. The memory of her face, of the tears, of the silence, has haunted me ever since. Now, when I sleep, I make sure every light is on. Every light, every sound. To drown out the crying, the sorrow. To drown out the feeling of her standing beside my bed. And every night, just before I close my eyes, I can still hear her. Still feel her presence, waiting right next to me. At first, I didn't think much of it. I'd wake up, stretch out, and notice my pillow was no longer in the spot where I'd left it the night before. I thought maybe I'd moved it in my sleep or pushed it to the side when I shifted positions during the night, but then it started happening more frequently. I'd wake up and my pillow would be on the opposite side of the bed, or sometimes it would be on the floor, tucked beneath the edge of the bed, as if it had been dragged there. It seemed like something I could easily dismiss. I've always been a restless sleeper, prone to tossing and turning. But after the third time it happened in 1 week, I started to feel unsettled. That night, I made a mental note of where I left my pillow before I drifted off to sleep. I placed it carefully on the left side of the bed, propped up against the headboard, just where I always liked it. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the streetlight outside filtering in through the blinds. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of the air conditioner and the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. It was quiet, too quiet. I fell asleep quickly, grateful for the stillness after a long, tiring day. But when I woke up, I felt the familiar sense of unease creeping in. I stretched and yawned, then opened my eyes. My pillow was gone. It wasn't on the left side of the bed where I had left it. It wasn't even near me, like it had somehow been pushed to the far end of the mattress. No, it was on the other side of the bed, exactly where I never put it. My heart skipped a beat. I sat up, my mind racing, trying to make sense of it. How did my pillow end up there? I hadn't moved it in my sleep. I was sure of that. But as I reached for it, I noticed something else. The pillow felt heavier than usual. A lot heavier. The fabric was warm, unnaturally so, like it had been pressed against something for a long time. It didn't feel right, but I couldn't explain why. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that maybe I was just imagining things, that I had moved it without realizing it. But it didn't make sense. I had been so careful to place it where I always did. That night, I decided to test it. I placed my pillow on the left side of the bed again, just as I had the night before. I told myself that if it was there when I woke up, I'd stop overthinking it. But if it wasn't, I stayed awake longer than usual, my eyes flicking between the clock on the wall and the pillow at my side. The silence in the room was oppressive, thick with the anticipation of what was coming. I felt my eyes grow heavy with sleep, but something inside me refused to let go. Eventually, I drifted off, and when I woke up, there it was again. My pillow, not where I'd left it. This time, it was across the bed, pushed to the far corner, almost as if it had been thrown. The sight of it made my heart race. I didn't move it. I was certain of that. I knew exactly where I had placed it before I fell asleep. I shot out of bed, the panic rising in my chest. I looked around the room, searching for anything that could explain it, but there was nothing. No open window, no draft, no reason why my pillow kept shifting. Then, something caught my eye. The blanket, which I had neatly tucked in around me, was slightly askew, pulled toward the edge of the bed. It was subtle, but unmistakable, as if someone had been in the bed, or something had shifted it. I was frozen. My mind raced through every possible explanation. Could I have moved it in my sleep? Could I have pulled it off the bed without realizing it? But no. I knew what I had seen. I knew what was happening. From that point on, it was like a game. A terrible, terrifying game. Every night, I'd carefully place my pillow in the same spot, and every morning it would be somewhere else. Sometimes on the floor, other times wedged into the corner of the bed, pushed beneath the edge of the mattress, as though someone or something had been there, dragging it around while I slept. But every time I awoke, the pillow was always in a different place. The more it happened, the more the sense of dread grew inside me. I could feel something was there, in the room with me, something that moved through the dark, unnoticed, something that came in when I was asleep, moving my pillow, changing the way the room felt when I woke. One night, I decided I wasn't going to just lie there anymore. I was going to stay awake, to watch, to catch it. I stayed in bed, my body tense, my eyes glued to the clock on the wall. I felt the weight of the night press against me, but I couldn't blink. I couldn't let my guard down. I waited. The minutes ticked by, the silence growing louder with each passing second. The sound came suddenly, a soft scrape against the pillow. At first it was almost imperceptible, like the rustling of sheets. But then it came again, louder this time, more deliberate. It was coming from beneath the bed. My heart leaped into my throat. I held my breath, afraid to move, afraid to make a sound. I stared at the dark shadows beneath the bed, praying that whatever it was wouldn't notice me. Then, I saw it. A shadow. The faintest movement, like a ripple of air, across the floor, stretching toward the bed. The space under the bed was too dark to see clearly, but the feeling, I felt it, like something was crawling, lurking, just beyond my vision. And then, the whisper came. Soft, almost like a breath, but clear as day. Leave me a mark. I couldn't breathe. My skin crawled, my whole body rigid with fear. The pillow shifted again, and this time, I heard it. A soft rustling sound, a sound too deliberate to be ignored. The pillow moved, not in a natural way. It floated, just barely off the bed, like something was dragging it. I couldn't take it anymore. My heart slammed against my chest, my mind screaming at me to run. I bolted upright, turning on the lights. The room flooded with light, and for a moment, everything was calm, still. But there was the pillow, resting on the bed, as though nothing had happened. And yet, I knew, I felt it. Whatever had moved, it wasn't gone. It was still in the room, watching, waiting. I don't sleep there anymore. I don't sleep at all, really, not in that bed. I can't bring myself to, but every night, when I close my eyes, I hear it. The soft scraping sound, like something moving in the dark, like the pillow shifting just beyond my reach. And when I wake up, it's never where I left it. It never will be.